Karen Whitfield, president of the Sagebrush Estates Homeowners Association, nearly choked on her morning coffee as she watched from her kitchen window. The massive vehicle rumbled down her pristine cul-de-sac, its rotating drums sloshing with liquid concrete before coming to a stop directly in front of her driveway. "What in God's name?" Karen muttered, squinting through her designer glasses. The truck's hazard lights blinked ominously in the pre-dawn gloom. She watched as a man in a hard hat and coveralls jumped down from the cab. He unhooked a heavy hose and began dragging it toward her front yard. This couldn't possibly be happening. Not here. Not in Sagebrush Estates, where property values had risen 22% under her leadership. Not on her immaculately landscaped lawn that had won Best Xeriscaping 3 years running. Karen slammed her coffee mug onto the granite countertop and rushed for the door, nearly tripping over her Maltipoo Duchess. "Stop right there," she shrieked, her silk robe flapping behind her as she burst onto her front porch. "What do you think you're doing?" The worker looked up, utterly unfazed. "Following orders, ma'am." He consulted a clipboard, filling in an illegal well on the property of. He squinted at the paperwork. Karen Whitfield, 1242 Sagebrush Lane. "Illegal well? There's no well on my property." Karen stomped barefoot across her lawn, jabbing a finger at the worker. "This is harassment. This is trespassing. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," came a deep voice from behind her. Karen whirled around to find herself face-to-face with a tall man in a worn Stetson hat and dusty boots. His weathered face was set in an expression of grim satisfaction. She recognized him immediately. Jack Harmon, owner of the sprawling ranch that bordered Sagebrush Estates. "You!" Karen hissed. "What have you done?" Jack Harmon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just returning the favor, Karen. Your little drilling operation destroyed my aquifer last month. Remember? When you decided my ranch would make a fine spot for your HOA's secret oil prospecting." The color drained from Karen's face. How had he found out? That operation had been conducted with the utmost secrecy, with only the HOA board and their hired contractors knowing the details. The plan had been perfect. Drill quietly on the border between Sagebrush Estates and Harmon Ranch, tap into what their geologists suspected was a small oil reserve, and use the profits to fund a community swimming pool without raising HOA fees. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen sputtered, but her voice lacked conviction. Jack pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photos, nighttime images of drilling equipment with the Sagebrush Estates HOA logo clearly visible, operating on the boundary of his property. "County inspector's already been out," Jack said, pocketing his phone. "Turns out you need permits for that sort of thing. And mineral rights." He nodded toward the cement truck. "This is just the beginning, Karen. I figure I'd give you a taste of what it feels like to have someone mess with your property." The cement worker stood awkwardly by, hose in hand. "So, are we filling a well, or what?" Karen looked from Jack to the worker to the growing crowd of neighbors in bathrobes gathering on their lawns. For the first time in her 12 years as HOA president, Karen Whitfield was completely speechless. 3 days after the cement truck incident, Karen sat at the head of the oval mahogany table in the Sagebrush Estates Community Center, desperately trying to maintain her composure. The monthly HOA board meeting had devolved into chaos within minutes of starting. "Order. I will have order." Karen slammed her gavel repeatedly, but the furious voices of homeowners only grew louder. "You used our funds for an illegal oil drilling operation?" shouted Marjorie from Cactus Court, her normally placid grandmother face contorted with rage. "My property taxes went up because of the environmental investigation," yelled Trevor, a normally quiet accountant who lived on the corner. Karen shot a desperate glance at her fellow board members, but found no allies there. Vice President Gerald was studiously examining his shoes. Treasurer Patricia was openly glaring at her. Even her longtime friend and HOA secretary, Deborah, was pointedly looking away. "If everyone would just calm down," Karen said with forced cheerfulness, "I can explain everything." "Please do," came a cold voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted, and Karen's stomach dropped as County Commissioner Rodriguez stepped forward, flanked by a woman in a suit whom Karen recognized as the district attorney. "Mrs. Whitfield," Commissioner Rodriguez continued, "perhaps you'd like to explain why the Sagebrush Estates HOA authorized drilling operations without permits, environmental impact studies, or mineral rights to the land in question?" Karen's mind raced. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was Karen Whitfield, Volunteer of the Year 3 times running, chairwoman of the Spring Gala, and the unquestioned authority on all matters relating to Sagebrush Estates since moving in 12 years ago. People respected her. People feared her. People certainly didn't question her. "The board made a unanimous decision," Karen said carefully, throwing her colleagues under the bus without hesitation, "to explore alternative funding opportunities for community improvements." "That's a lie." Patricia, the treasurer, stood up, her financial reports clutched in a white-knuckle grip. I have the minutes from every meeting for the past year. This was never put to a vote. Gerald cleared his throat. I remember you mentioning something about resource exploration at the executive session last month, but you said it was just a preliminary investigation. Karen's carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. We were going to share the profits with the whole community, she said weakly. By drilling on my land? Jack Harmon pushed through the crowd, holding up a stack of papers. I got the surveys right here. Your equipment was 3 feet onto my property. And the environmental impact report shows contamination of the aquifer. Commissioner Rodriguez added, multiple violations of county ordinances, state environmental regulations, and possibly federal laws. The district attorney stepped forward. We're not here to arrest anyone today, but I should inform everyone that we've opened a formal investigation into misappropriation of HOA funds and environmental crimes. Karen felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. She needed to regain control. This meeting is adjourned, she announced, banging her gavel. No one moved. Actually, Deborah said quietly, according to our bylaws, a 2/3 vote of homeowners present can remove a board member for cause. She looked around the packed room. I think we have quorum. As hands shot up around the room, Karen realized with dawning horror that her reign as HOA president was about to come to an inglorious end. Karen's Mercedes SUV sat untouched in her garage for a full week after her humiliating removal from the HOA board. She couldn't bear to face her neighbors, couldn't stand the thought of their whispers and stares. Grocery deliveries piled up at her door. She stopped attending her Pilates class. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with messages from community members seeking her approval for everything from fence paint to mailbox designs, lay silent except for calls from her lawyer. On the 8th day of her self-imposed isolation, the doorbell rang. Karen peered through the peephole to see Deborah standing on her porch clutching a casserole dish. Go away, Karen shouted through the door. Karen, please, Deborah called back. We need to talk. Against her better judgment, Karen opened the door a crack. Have you come to gloat? Or to deliver more bad news? The district attorney already called. I'm to appear before the grand jury next week. Deborah looked genuinely distressed. I'm so sorry about all this. I never wanted. Never wanted what? To stab me in the back? To turn the whole neighborhood against me? Karen's voice cracked. I made this community what it is today. Before me, people were installing above-ground pools and painting their houses whatever colors they wanted. It was chaos. Karen, Deborah said gently, you did a lot of good things for Sagebrush Estates, but you went too far. The drilling scheme, the unilateral decisions, the fines you imposed without board approval. It wasn't right. Karen's shoulders sagged. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly defeated. I was just trying to keep our HOA fees from increasing. The oil would have paid for everything we needed, by breaking the law and risking environmental damage. That's not who we are as a community. Something inside Karen snapped. Who we are? Who we are? I define who we are. I've spent 12 years of my life making sure this neighborhood was perfect. I've sacrificed everything for Sagebrush Estates. Deborah set the casserole down on the porch and looked at Karen with a mixture of pity and concern. That's just it, Karen. You've sacrificed your relationships, your reputation, and now possibly your freedom. For what? Control over what color people can paint their mailboxes. The truth of Deborah's words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her perfect life, her perfect community, had been an illusion maintained through intimidation and rigid control. And now it was all crumbling. The new board met yesterday, Deborah continued. We voted to cooperate fully with the investigation and to implement new transparency measures. Who's the new president? Karen asked, already knowing the answer. Jack Harmon, Deborah confirmed. He bought 3 lots in Sagebrush after the drilling incident. He was elected unanimously. Karen felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Jack Harmon? The cowboy? Running my homeowners association? He's actually a retired environmental attorney, Deborah said, and his first action was to propose a settlement with the county that might keep you out of jail. Karen blinked in confusion. Why would he do that? He said something about not believing in revenge, that the cement truck was just to get your attention, not to ruin your life. Deborah hesitated. He's invited you to the next board meeting to discuss how you can make amends to the community. For a moment, Karen felt a flicker of her old indignation. How dare they presume she needed to make amends? But as quickly as it flared, it died away, leaving only exhaustion and a strange sense of relief. Maybe it was time to let go of the iron control she maintained for so long. I'll think about it, she said, which was more than she would have conceded a week ago. As Deborah turned to leave, she paused. You know, some of us miss the old Karen, the one who organized the fundraiser when the Miller's house burned down, the one who brought meals when my John was in the hospital, before you became so obsessed with rules and control. After Deborah left, Karen stood in her foyer for a long time, surrounded by the perfect furnishings of her perfect house and her perfect neighborhood, wondering when exactly she had lost herself. The county courthouse loomed before Karen like a medieval fortress. She clutched her designer handbag with white knuckles as her lawyer, a slick-haired man named Martin who she was paying $500 an hour, guided her through a gauntlet of local reporters. "Mrs. Whitfield has no comment at this time," Martin repeated as camera flashes popped around them. "Is it true the HOA was drilling for oil on private property?" shouted one reporter. "Did you know about the environmental violations?" called another. Karen kept her head down, grateful for the large sunglasses hiding her red-rimmed eyes. The grand jury proceedings weren't public, but the media coverage of the HOA oil scandal, as the local news had dubbed it, had turned her into a community pariah. Inside the courthouse, Karen and Martin were directed to a small conference room where District Attorney Helena Vasquez waited with a stack of documents. Commissioner Rodriguez sat beside her, along with a representative from the State Environmental Protection Agency. "Mrs. Whitfield," DA Vasquez began, "before your grand jury appearance, we wanted to discuss a possible resolution to this matter." Karen glanced at Martin, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm listening," Karen said. Commissioner Rodriguez slid a document across the table. "We have a proposal from Sagebrush Estates HOA. They're offering to take responsibility as an organization, implement environmental remediation on both their property and Mr. Harmon's ranch, and establish a community oversight committee for all future HOA decisions. In exchange," DA Vasquez continued, "we would focus our prosecution on the organizational entity rather than on you personally." Karen couldn't believe what she was hearing. "They're protecting me." "Not exactly," the EPA representative interjected. "You would still face civil penalties and be required to perform community service. But you would avoid criminal charges if you cooperate fully with our investigation." Martin leaned forward. "What kind of cooperation are we talking about?" "Full disclosure of all decisions related to the drilling operation, names of contractors involved, financial records, and Mrs. Whitfield's public acknowledgement of wrongdoing." Karen flinched at the last requirement. Public acknowledgement meant public humiliation. It meant standing up in front of the entire community, the same community that had once feared and respected her, and admitting she had been wrong. "I need to think about this," she said. DA Vasquez gathered her papers. "The grand jury is scheduled for 2 p.m. You have until then to decide." Left alone with her lawyer, Karen paced the small conference room. "You should take the deal," Martin advised. "The alternative could be criminal charges, massive fines, even jail time. But a public admission? I'd be destroying what's left of my reputation." Martin sighed. "Karen, your reputation is already in tatters. This is about damage control now." Karen sank into a chair, the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. How had things gone so terribly wrong? The drilling had been her idea, pitched to the board as a preliminary investigation only. When the geologist had reported signs of a small oil deposit, she had moved forward without further board approval, using HOA reserve funds to hire a drilling company. It was supposed to be her crowning achievement, finding a way to fund community improvements without raising fees. Instead, it had become her downfall. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. To her surprise, Jack Harmon entered, his Stetson hat in his hands. "What are you doing here?" Karen asked, too tired to muster real anger. "I came to make sure you understand the deal we're offering," Jack said, taking a seat across from her. "Why would you help me after what I did?" Jack considered her for a moment. "I've been watching you run Sagebrush Estates like your personal kingdom for years. You've been overbearing, inflexible, and downright tyrannical at times." Karen winced but couldn't deny the truth of his words. "But," Jack continued, "Deborah tells me you weren't always that way. Says underneath all that HOA President bluster is someone who actually cares about her community. I'm betting that person is still in there somewhere." Karen felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. "So this is what? A redemption opportunity?" "Call it a second chance," Jack said. "Take responsibility, help fix the mess, and maybe discover there's life after being the HOA queen." As Jack stood to leave, Karen found herself at a crossroads. She could fight, deny responsibility, blame others, drag the community through a protracted legal battle. Or she could take the first step toward becoming someone new. Someone, perhaps, more like the person she used to be. The Sagebrush Estates Community Center had never been so packed. Folding chairs filled every available space, with latecomers standing against the walls. Local news cameras were set up in the back, their red recording lights glowing like accusatory eyes. At the front of the room, the new HOA board, with Jack Harmon at its center, sat behind a long table facing the assembled residents. Karen waited in a small side room, her heart pounding. She had accepted the deal offered by the district attorney, but the hardest part was yet to come: the public admission of wrongdoing before her neighbors and community. "It's time," Deborah said, poking her head through the door. Karen smoothed her conservative navy blue dress and took a deep breath. She had deliberately chosen an outfit that was understated, a far cry from the power suits and designer labels she typically wore to exert her authority. Today it wasn't about intimidation. It was about humility. When she walked into the main room, a hush fell over the crowd. Dozens of eyes tracked her movement to the podium that had been set up beside the board table. Some gazes were curious, others hostile, but all were intent on what she was about to say. Karen placed her prepared statement on the podium, then looked up at the sea of familiar faces. These were people whose fence height she had measured, whose holiday decorations she had critiqued, whose lives she had micromanaged for years. The realization made her feel slightly ill. "Good evening," she began, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "As most of you know, I'm here to address the actions I took regarding unauthorized drilling operations on the border of our community and Harmon Ranch." She glanced down at her notes, then made a split-second decision and pushed them aside. Rehearsed words wouldn't fix what she had broken. "I've spent the past 12 years telling all of you how to live in this community, what colors you could paint your houses, how tall your grass could be, whether your children could have a basketball hoop." Karen paused, letting the words sink in. "I convinced myself I was protecting our property values, but the truth is, I was protecting my own sense of control." Murmurs rippled through the audience. This was not the defiant Karen Whitfield they knew. "The drilling operation was my idea. I presented it to the board as a preliminary investigation only, but when oil was detected, I moved forward without proper authorization. I misappropriated HOA reserve funds. I hired contractors without permits. I ignored environmental regulations. And I did all of this without the knowledge or consent of the full board or the community." Karen gripped the edges of the podium, forcing herself to continue. "My actions have resulted in environmental damage to Harmon Ranch, potential groundwater contamination affecting all our homes, and legal jeopardy for our entire HOA. For that, I am deeply sorry." The room remained silent, residents watching her with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction. "As part of the agreement with the county, I will be personally funding a portion of the environmental remediation. I will be performing 200 hours of community service, and I will be stepping back completely from any HOA leadership role." She looked directly at Jack Harmon then. "Mr. Harmon has shown remarkable restraint and generosity in helping to negotiate this settlement. His cement truck stunt, which at the time I considered a declaration of war, was actually a wake-up call that I desperately needed." Jack nodded slightly, a brim of his Stetson hiding his expression. "In closing," Karen said, "I want to apologize not just for the drilling fiasco, but for years of overstepping my authority, for turning what should have been a collaborative community into my personal fiefdom. You all deserve better." As Karen stepped away from the podium, she expected, "What?" Applause seemed unlikely. Perhaps some grudging acknowledgement of her honesty? Instead, the room remained awkwardly silent as she made her way to an empty chair in the back row. Jack Harmon took the podium next. "Thank you, Karen, for your candor. Now let's discuss how we move forward as a community." As the meeting progressed, Karen sat quietly, a strange sensation washing over her. For the first time in years, she was just another resident, not in charge, not making decisions, not the center of attention. It felt terrifying. And also, somehow, like freedom. 6 weeks after her public confession, Karen stood in the blazing July sun, sweat dampening her t-shirt as she jabbed a trash picker at a discarded fast food wrapper. Around her, 20 other volunteers in matching Sagebrush County environmental cleanup shirts worked their way along the highway, filling bright orange garbage bags. Water Break, called the project coordinator, a cheerful woman from the county environmental office. Karen gratefully retreated to the shade of a pop-up tent where coolers of ice water awaited. She was on her 40th hour of community service, with 160 more to go. The manual labor was a sharp departure from her previous life of committee meetings and HOA enforcement rounds, but she was surprised to find it oddly satisfying. There was something straightforward about picking up trash, no politics, no power struggles, just tangible progress. "Mind if I join you?" Karen looked up to see Jack Harmon, also wearing a volunteer shirt and holding a paper cup of water. Over the past weeks, they had developed a cautious working relationship as part of the Environmental Remediation Committee, but this was the first time he had sought her out socially. "Free country," Karen replied, sliding over to make room on the bench. Jack sat beside her, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know, when I first moved to the area, I heard all about the infamous Karen Whitfield. The neighbors warned me you were a force of nature, part dictator, part bloodhound when it came to HOA violations." Karen winced. "Not my finest legacy. I figured you for a power-hungry tyrant," Jack continued. "But watching you these past weeks, well, I'm starting to think there's more to the story." Karen sipped her water, considering how much to share. Did you know I was a city planner before I moved to Sagebrush Estates? I specialized in community development, creating spaces where people could thrive. Jack raised his eyebrows in surprise. Can't say I would have guessed that. When my husband and I bought our house, Sagebrush was a mess. Abandoned projects, inconsistent architecture, no cohesive vision. I ran for the HOA board because I thought I could help. Karen shook her head ruefully. Somewhere along the way, helping turned into controlling. Power does that, Jack said. Corrupts even the best intentions. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching volunteers trudge back and forth with their garbage bags. The environmental engineers finished their assessment at my ranch yesterday, Jack said. The aquifer contamination isn't as bad as we feared. They think we can remediate most of the damage. That's good news, Karen said, genuine relief in her voice. The potential environmental impact of her actions had been weighing heavily on her conscience. They're starting work next week. I thought you might want to be involved, seeing as how you're the one paying for a third of it. Jack's eyes crinkled with the hint of a smile. Karen had indeed agreed to contribute a significant portion of her savings to the remediation effort. Between that and her legal fees, her financial situation had taken a substantial hit. She even had to sell her Mercedes. I'd like that, she said. It's only fair that I help clean up my own mess. As they headed back to their cleanup duties, Jack hesitated. There's something else. The new board is reinstating the community garden project that got tabled last year. We need someone with project management experience to oversee it. Karen stopped short. Are you offering me a role? A strictly non-leadership volunteer position, Jack clarified. But yes, your background in city planning could be valuable if you're willing to collaborate rather than command. The irony wasn't lost on Karen. After years of wielding authority, she was being offered a chance to serve the community without any power attached. 6 months ago, she would have found the idea insulting. Now it felt like precisely what she needed. I'll think about it, she said, but they both knew she would accept. As they resumed their work along the highway, Karen found herself smiling despite the heat and the tedium. Her life had been upended, her reputation tarnished, her finances depleted. And yet something new was emerging from the wreckage, something that felt, improbably, like a chance at redemption. That evening, as Karen pulled into her driveway, she noticed her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, working in her front garden. In the past, Karen would have been mentally cataloging potential violations. Unapproved plant species, excessive lawn ornaments, the slightly crooked garden border. Instead, she walked over and did something she hadn't done in years. She asked Mrs. Chen about her day, admired her flowers, and made small talk without a hidden agenda. The surprise on Mrs. Chen's face was almost comical. But by the end of their conversation, the elderly woman was beaming and promising to share some bulbs from her prized tulips. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But as Karen walked back to her house, she felt a weight lifting, one small stone at a time from a burden she had carried for far too long. 1 year to the day after the cement truck incident, Sagebrush Estates was hosting its annual community picnic in the newly completed neighborhood park. Children raced across the playground equipment while adults gathered around picnic tables laden with potluck offerings. The centerpiece of the park, a community garden with raised beds bursting with vegetables and flowers, drew admiring comments from visitors. Karen stood at the edge of the gathering, a dish of her homemade potato salad in her hands, watching the scene with mixed emotions. The park had been completed using funds from a community fundraising campaign instead of the oil drilling scheme she had envisioned. The result was smaller than her grand plans, but created with genuine community involvement. Are you going to join us or just stand there all day? Jack called from a nearby table, where he was setting up the grills for the barbecue. Karen made her way over, setting her dish down among the growing array of food. In the past year, she and Jack had developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared work on the environmental remediation project and the community garden. His straightforward manner had been a refreshing change from the politics and posturing she was accustomed to. Quite a turnout, Karen remarked, looking around the crowd. She recognized most faces, but there were many newcomers too. Sagebrush Estates had been growing. People tend to show up when there's free food and no mandatory HOA agenda to sit through, Jack said with a wink. The new HOA under Jack's leadership was dramatically different from Karen's reign. Meetings were shorter, rules were more flexible, and committees were formed to address issues collaboratively rather than through top-down decrees. Property values had remained stable despite Karen's dire predictions about what would happen without her strict oversight. As the afternoon progressed, Karen found herself genuinely enjoying the community she had once ruled with an iron fist. She chatted with neighbors who had previously feared her, played with children who had once been shooed off her perfect lawn, and even laughed at jokes about her former HOA tyranny. After the meal, Jack called for everyone's attention. Before we cut the ribbon on our new community garden, I want to recognize the person who made this project possible. Despite our rocky start, laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen Whitfield has put hundreds of hours into designing and implementing this garden. Karen, would you come up here? Karen felt her face flush as she made her way to the front. The applause was polite but genuine, a far cry from the hostile silence that had greeted her at the community meeting a year ago. Thank you, she said simply when Jack handed her the ceremonial scissors. This garden represents what a community can accomplish when we work together instead of against each other. I've learned that lesson the hard way, but I'm grateful for the chance to be part of something built on cooperation rather than control. As cheers erupted, Karen cut the ribbon across the garden entrance. Photos were taken, congratulations offered, and gradually the crowd dispersed to enjoy the rest of the festivities. Later, as the sun began to set and volunteers were cleaning up, Jack found Karen sitting alone on a park bench, watching the last children being called home by their parents. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. Karen smiled wryly. "I was just thinking about how differently things turned out than I expected. A year ago, I thought my life was over. My reputation destroyed, my finances in sha.